Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, by popular demand, we will be reviewing every single studio album from English doom metal and gothic metal crew Paradise Lost. In retrospect, I probably should have made this video closer to the release of Icon 30, but c'est la vie. It is what it is. I'm a busy guy. At least you're finally getting it now. Stop yelling at me! But first, allow me to ever so quickly remind you that the Metal Meltdown is streaming on Monday, December 18th at approximately 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is our 15,000 subscribers celebration live stream, to be exact. We're gonna hang out. We're gonna shoot the shit. We're gonna party. We're also going to drink. In fact, every time you donate to the Metal Meltdown during the live stream, I will take a shot. Also, every single dollar made through donations or through ad revenue via that live stream will also be sent to the Fort York Food Bank. Also, on top of all of that, I'm gonna be dressed up as a hot dog. Look, I might be biased because it's my party and I'm hosting it, but if it weren't my party, if I weren't hosting it, I'd be like, I want to go to that party. That sounds kind of cool. I've got some time to spare. I can just pop in for a bit, whatever. So pop on by. Be there and be square. Preferably be there. I don't know why you would want to be square. I don't know what you gain from being square. I don't know what benefit there is to being square. If there is a benefit, please feel free to tell me. I'm genuinely curious. Alright, let's not waste any more time. As per the norm with these reviewing every album style videos, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations, or anything released by any kind of solo or side project. I am only talking about the studio albums made by Paradise Lost. I will be talking about each in order of release, and assigning each a score out of 5. First up, we have Lost Paradise, released February 1990 via Peaceville Records, and for a debut album, pretty solid, pretty good. It's definitely not as tight or as polished as I would want or frankly even expect from a modern day Paradise Lost album, but there's a lot to enjoy and appreciate here. For one, the atmosphere and the vibe of this record. Like, it is very dark, it is very gloomy, and it has subtle strings and synths and some haunting choral vocal work. You have these bits of like grimy, chunky, scuzzy, fast-paced death metal riffage contrasted with some more melodic and melancholic guitar work, some full-on like heavy metal shredding, and of course these towering, lumbering, slow-paced, doomy drawls and some ghastly vocals from Nick Holmes. This whole thing ends up kind of sounding like if to Megatherion-era Celtic Frost tried to make a doom metal record. I mean, stuff like Frozen Illusion, Rotting Misery, Internal Torment 2, after all these years, it still legitimately puts a chill down my spine. I'm feeling a very enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5 right off the bat with this one. If there were a way to kind of bring in some of the textures and ideas of like later Paradise Lost and kind of combine it with this, we would have a 4 out of 5 album, easy fucking peasy. Next up, we have Gothic, released in March 1991, once again via Peaceville Records. This is very much a continuation of what we just talked about with Lost Paradise. Those same textures, those same atmospheres, those same vibes. But now we've brought in more clean vocals, we've brought in some orchestral stuff, we've brought in some more kind of like gloomy soundscapes, some goth rock influence. And the result is an album that just oozes misery and melancholy. Like, this thing is so gloomy, so dark, still sonically as brutal as Lost Paradise, but more going on thematically and more going on in the production and in the overall construction of the record. The songs themselves are also getting a little bit more complex and a little bit more progressive. We're speeding things up a little bit. A part of me would like a cleaner, more balanced kind of sound mix overall, but then again, it's hard to complain when the music kicks as much ass as it does. Plus, if you go for a cleaner sound mix, then suddenly you don't have like something as awesome as Rapture, which is just caked in filth and scuzz to an overwhelmingly satisfying degree. Like, I feel like there's just sludge and slime being kicked up every time we get those, like, doom metal downbeats, you know? Every time we start going into those really, like, slow-paced, nasty riffs. Same goes for Silent as well. I mean, I swear to God, at a certain point, Nick Holmes must be eating that fucking microphone. Like, holy shit. His voice just completely consumes everything around you. And you're still able to get some really pretty stuff despite it not having the cleanest sound. Like the opening number and title track, Gothic, I think is genuinely kind of beautiful. Yeah, it's an easy 4 to 5 for me. I think this album's great. Probably one of the most important, like, death doom gothic metal records ever made. And after all these years, maybe even still one of the best. Next up, we have Shades of God, released in July 1992 via Music for Nations, and it appears as though Paradise Lost's hot streak has no end in sight. Because goddamn, this record kicks ass. It's actually been a while since I had listened to this album, so I kind of forgot how fucking good it was. It kind of finds a really great soft spot in between what Paradise Lost were doing on Gothic and what Paradise Lost would soon do on Icon. Like, we still have this more complex, nuanced kind of death doom with these gloomy textures and these, like, gothic metal elements, but the band is starting to incorporate some bigger melodies, and Nick Holmes is starting to go into, like, clean vocals himself, and the production is also a lot more crisp, a lot more polished. I'd say, sonically, this is, like, one of the best sounding, like, kind of extreme metal records of the early 90s, actually. Everything just sounds amazing. It sizzles and pops, and it's so crisp and it's so clear, but it still has like a little bit of that raw, scuzzy, underground metal underbelly to it. Fucking menace on vocals with this one. I love that he's able to incorporate these kind of like clean vocals while still kind of keeping to his like guttural and growling vocals. The way he bellows and grunts and roars, he consistently commands so much of your attention. And the songwriting is just top-notch here. I mean, Mortals Watch the Day, Your Hand in Mine, Crying for Eternity, Pity the Sadness, Daylight Torn, The World Made Flesh. I do find myself missing some of the more orchestral elements of Gothic. A lot of that has been stripped away, but overall it's hard to complain with like this level of like songwriting and songcraft. It's just excellent from start to finish. Honestly, 4.5 out of 5, I think it's an incredible record. Dare I say, one of my faves from Paradise Lost, at least as far as this early era of Paradise Lost is concerned. I don't know, I'm tempted to say it. It's really tempting, but I don't know. We got a couple heavy hitters coming up next, so we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Next up, we have Icon, released in September 1993 via Music for Nations. This is pretty much the point where Paradise Lost fully embrace being a gothic metal band. They've stripped away a lot of the death metal influence. There are no more gutturals. Nick Holmes is doing like clean vocals only now. We're re-embracing some of those orchestral goth rock elements from the Gothic album. It's very gloomy and melancholic. There's definitely still some doom metal influence. It's definitely still very slow-paced, but I'd say this probably has more in common with like Type O Negative than it does with like Black Sabbath or Candlemass at this point. From what I understand, Paradise Lost were kind of unhappy with this album to a certain extent, specifically with what their drummer brought to the record. That's part of why they recently did Icon 30. But honestly, I think the original Icon like holds up really fucking well. Ember's Fire, Remembrance, Colossal Rains, Widow, these are all still great songs. There's a lot of emotion to these numbers. The record as a whole has a really great sense of like grandeur and scale. I will say that having recently heard Icon 30 and having spent a bunch of time with it in order to review that album, I do find myself now weirdly preferring Icon 30, but I'm still going to give this like a 4 to 5. I still think it does hold up really fucking well. And the fact that it does hold up so well, despite there being an arguably superior version of it now out there on the market, I think is a testament to the strength of the original album, testament to the strength of the songwriting and the way this whole thing was put together. Next up, we have Draconian Times, released in June 1995 via Music for Nations and Relativity. And now we've pretty much reached the point where Paradise Lost is maybe starting to lean away from being like a metal band. There's still metal influence. In fact, there's a lot of like classic heavy metal and even like hard rock and like 90s alt metal influence on this record. But this definitely feels more gothic than it does, say, metal, because simultaneously there's also more goth rock, post-punk shades and textures and rhythms that are being brought in. In many ways, it's like a mid-90s metal record with like the heart and the soul of like an early 80s goth rock record. You can hear that especially in cuts like Hallowed Land and Yearn for Change. There's a good amount of like 90s goth metal melodrama on this record that I think is really enticing and really cool. The opening cut, Enchanted Land, has some really great keyboard work, for instance. Elusive Cure is strong as well. Hell, Once Solemn almost kind of feels like a goth punk, horror punk kind of number. Like, it's got a lot of, like, enthusiasm and momentum to it. I'm feeling a 4 to 5 on this one, maybe leaning slightly towards a 4.5 out of 5. I think I like this more than Icon, but I don't know if I like this more than Shades of God. I'm not sure just yet. Next up, we have 1 Second, released in July 1997 via Music for Nations once again. And Paradise Lost are switching things up big time with this one. You know how Draconian Times kind of felt more like a goth rock record at times? Well, 1 Second is a goth rock record all the time, not at times, not feels like. It is all the time. It's also bringing in influences from like electronic music and alternative rock. There are some darker shades and movements here and there, but to call this a metal record would just be a flat out lie. And honestly, I'm kind of fine with all that because I think 1 Second is a thoroughly underrated album. Like, there's a lot of really fucking good stuff here, man. I mean, Soul Courageous, Say Less Words, the title track, 1 Second. Another Day, The Suffer, Lydia, Take Me Down, all of which cram-packed with cinematic gloom, emotionally charged. So dark, yet so up-tempo, like the songs are really catchy. You have organs and strings and these dark, bellowing vocals and these really great orchestral sections and some really strong hooks and melodies, hell, bordering on synth-pop at times when combined with some of the electronic stuff. And honestly, if you just want the heavier stuff, you're still gonna get it. Like, Blood of Another would have easily fit in on either Icon or Draconian Times, honest to fucking God. I'm not really sure where people stand on this album. Historically, when a metal band does something that isn't metal, it's usually pretty controversial, but personally, I think this is a great fucking record. Next up, we have Host, released in May 1999 via EMI, and Paradise Lost's hot streak continues to continue while Paradise Lost continue switching things the fuck up. This time going further into electronic territory, going into like dark wave and trance and dance music and synth pop territory, retaining some of that gothic sheen and aesthetic. It is quite moody and melancholic, but not so much in the way of Icon or Draconian Times or even 1 Second. This honestly has more in common with a Depeche Mode record. And honestly, I'm kind of okay with that because I kind of like this album. I will concede 1 Second is much stronger. It's a much more cohesive record. But honestly, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff here, and I would argue that much like 1 Second, this is honestly kind of an underrated album. I like a lot of the programmed drums and like the synth melodies and the more simplistic take on like vocals and harmonies and shit like that. I like the way everything's layered. I like how these beats kind of like pounce and flow. I like that we're integrating some like heavier kind of rock guitar work into the choruses to give this a little bit more oomph. Like Made the Same, Nothing Sacred, Behind the Gray, I honestly think these are solid cuts. I will say that this thing is not the most consistent offering. There is a little bit of filler and it does kind of feel like we're running low on steam at certain points. But overall, I'm feeling like a 3.5 out of 5, honestly. I'm happy to say, too, that this is an album that Paradise Lost stand by after all these years. Like, they actually think it's one of their darkest albums, and they like it so much that Nick and Greg McIntosh actually kind of went out of their way to revive this era of Paradise Lost through a band called Host. And their debut album, 9, was so good that I actually placed it in my top 10 best non-metal albums of 2023 video. Like, it's one of the best albums of this year. Next up, we have Believe in Nothing, released in February 2001 via EMI Electrola. And this is the point where maybe the Paradise Lost hot streak has come to a bit of an end. By no means a terrible album, but it definitely feels like Paradise Lost are a bit, well, lost on this thing, and they're maybe kind of phoning it in just a little bit. I mean, look, we had 7 really cool, distinct albums back to back, all exploring different sounds and different styles, everything from Deaf Doom to New Wave to Gothic Metal to classic Gothic Rock and post-punk. To a certain extent, this drop-off was inevitable, but it's disappointing because I'm not really sure why it happened. I mean, I do know why it happened, but also, why did this happen? Like, as time has gone on, Paradise Lost have talked about how they were all on prescription drugs and how they were all kind of, like, out of it and depressed at the time. And, you know, they were never really happy with, like, the production of this record. They stand by some of the songs, but overall, they just think this is kind of a messy and unremarkable record. And I mean, like, yeah, I'm not going to argue with Paradise Lost on that. I don't think it's horrible. Like, I do like seeing some of those more, like, 90s goth rock, goth metal influences kind of come back into the fray, fusing that with, like, some 2000s alternative rock. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. I don't hate it. I think there's little bits and pieces that you can get some enjoyment out of. I don't know, but, like, would I ever listen to this, even in its best moments, in favor of something like Draconian Times or Icon or Shades of God or even Host or 1 Second? Fuck no, man. There's a reason why even Paradise Lost don't like this record. It's just not very good. Next up, we have Symbol of Life, released in October 2002 via Gun Records and Coach. And it's sonically heavier than Believe in Nothing. That's something, I guess. It's not as mid. Ooh. This whole album just kind of reeks of, like, Mom, can we have Rammstein? No, son, we have Rammstein at home, and Symbol of Life is Rammstein at home. Like, we've brought back those darker, heavier, more metallic guitar tones. It is very much a gothic metal record, but also there's a lot of, like, electronic percussion and a lot of synthesizer stuff and these, like, weird electronic, like, frills and bits and pieces and garnishes, and it really just feels like a gloomier take on Rammstein as a result. Despite sonically being heavier, I kind of feel like it suffers from the same problems as Believe in Nothing. Like, I just kind of feel like these guys, like, their hearts and their heads aren't really in the right place. They're not focused. If you put a gun to my head and told me to choose between Believe in Nothing or Symbol of Life, I would probably pick Symbol of Life, but ultimately I would probably still rate it the same as Believe in Nothing, like a 2.5 out of 5. Frankly, if this had been released by any other band, like a 2000s alt-metal band instead of Paradise Lost, I don't even think we'd really be talking about it. Next up, we have a self-titled album, Paradise Lost, released in March 2005 via Gun Records and BMG. This, I would say, is much more in line with what I think people want from Paradise Lost. Like, we've officially returned to the classic 90s gothic metal sound. It also just kind of sounds and feels as if Paradise Lost are, like, way more into this material. There are some little bits and pieces and shades that are reeking of, like, 2000s cringe metal energy, and I'm not feeling that. But whatever. Overall, I think that this is a much stronger record, and this, definitely an improvement after the last couple. Like, Don't Belong starts us off on this bombastic, grandiose note without being, like, too overwhelming. There's some thunderous guitar stuff here, some great kind of, like, orchestral keyboard stuff kind of, like, woven through. There's some really great, bitter, gloomy doom on Sun Fading as well. I kind of like Redshift too. I mean, I know I was just talking shit about those, like, cringy 2000s, like, metal vibes, but, like, it kind of works on this number. I think vocals could be better. I can't tell if it's an issue with Nick or if it's an issue with, like, how specifically they've been kind of mixed and, like, kind of folded into everything else. Other than that, though, honestly, I would say I enjoyed this record, and I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5 on this bad boy. We're still a far cry away from the days of Icon and Draconian Times, but, all things considered, a pretty good record. Next up, we have In Requiem, released May 2007 via Century Media Records. Here the band are building off the success of their self-titled record, and sonically this kind of feels like their darkest and their most cinematic record to date. Like, it is full-blown like doom and gothic metal with a lot of strings and a lot of orchestral arrangements, to the point where at times it really does feel like a symphonic metal album. Even the artwork for this thing is like a lot darker. Like, I look at that and I don't think Paradise Lost. I think like Dimmu Borgir or Septic Flesh or something like that. Honestly, a great record. The way that the orchestral stuff has been woven into everything is great. It's able to give this a lot of body and height without overwhelming the senses. Some really great soulful-inspired guitar work here. It's dark, it's oppressive. Nick also sounds a lot more present and confident and comfortable as a vocalist here. A lot of great stuff on here, like The Enemy especially almost has like the magnitude of like an epic doom metal song, especially with like those chanted vocals and that like muscular kind of epic metal guitar work. Never for the Damned is a fantastic album opener as well. I mean, this in true Paradise Lost fashion just oozes melancholy and misery and darkness. Stuff like Beneath Black Skies, Fallen Children, all great stuff as well. I'm feeling a very enthusiastic 4 to 5 on this. Paradise Lost is back, baby. Next up, we have Faith Divides Us, Death Unites Us, released in September 2009 via Century Media Records. Honestly, you can copy and paste a lot of what I just said about In Requiem. It succeeds for a lot of the same reasons. It's massive, it's cinematic, it's enthralling, it's super moody. We've stripped away some of the symphonic stuff, but like it still succeeds for a lot of the same reasons, and it still has a lot of that same like scale and power. If I do have anything to add, I would say that there is a fair bit of compression. Listening to this on like a high volume, like the audio can clip and get a little fucked up. Hell, even on a medium volume on my laptop, I found that some things were kind of getting strained out a little bit. I think for that reason, I would go with a 3.5 out of 5 as opposed to a 4. But again, it really does succeed for a lot of the same reasons. And if you liked In Requiem, there's no reason why you also wouldn't love Faith Divides Us, Death Unites Us. Next up, we have Tragic Idol, released in April 2012, once again via Century Media Records. This album kind of tones down like the intense heaviness and darkness of the last two albums and focuses a lot of its attention on influences from classic heavy metal and classic doom metal. And I think that's a nice change of pace for the band because it kind of just allows them to whip out some really great riffs and solos and kind of indulge in some epic metal goodness. It still has some more intense moments, like Theories from Another World, for instance, kind of brings in this, like, double bass percussion with, like, big walls of, like, harmonized, like, twin guitar riffage and some shouted vocals. It almost, in a weird way, feels like something that Trivia might have put out on one of their more, like, epic heavy metal kind of oriented records. But, like, ultimately the focus is that kind of, like, epic, heavy metal, doom metal kind of vibe. Like, Crucify for Existence is filled with big, chunky, groove-laden passages, some absolutely sizzling guitar pyrotechnics. It almost kind of feels like something like The Sword would have done on Apocryphon at the time. In general, though this predates Chemist, this whole album reminds me a lot of Chemist and their kind of take on what they call, like, doomed heavy metal as well. Feeling a solid 3.5 out of 5 on this one. I like it. Nice change of pace for Paradise Lost. Side note, we haven't really addressed this, not really, but I like that Paradise Lost will just be totally comfortable really switching things up now and then. It makes this much more refreshing than I expected this to be, you know? It's not like Cannibal Corpse where it's like, yeah, it's every album is death metal, you know? Like, and I'm running out of shit to say. Next up, we have The Plague Within, released in June 2015 via Century Media Records. And this was actually my introduction to Paradise Lost back in the day. And I remember when this came out too, because this was such a big fucking deal. People were so hyped for this record because Paradise Lost was finally reintegrating death metal and specifically death doom influence into their sound. And I liked this album at the time, don't get me wrong, but I also didn't know much about Paradise Lost, so I kind of didn't have that kind of context. I was just like, yeah, it's cool. Now I listen to it, and especially now that I've gone through all of these albums, and I'm like, God damn, this thing fucking hits. I especially love that this doesn't feel like a carbon copy of those first few records. Like, this doesn't feel like a repeat of Gothic or Shades of God. It has its own feel, its own distinct vibe. It just so happens to reincorporate elements from that era. The way that Death Doom specifically is integrated makes this feel like such a gloomy, depressing, mournful record. Like, Tragic Idol is brimming with enthusiasm and life and power compared to this. This is a pretty somber record, like, with delicate keyboards and a few little string pieces here and there, but some, like, really dry, like, crackled, like, guttural vocals. There's a lot of character and a lot of depth to those vocals here. There are clean vocals on the record, but they're sparsely used, and when they do show up, they are extremely effective. The opening number, No Hope in Sight, I'd go as far as to say has probably some of Nick's best, like, dual vocal performances ever. I mean, his contrast and his balance between those really venomous, sinister gutturals and those, like, completely, like, gloomy cleans, which just sound devoid of hope and care. Like, it's so well done. It paints a beautifully morbid picture. It's cool to see Paradise Lost kind of treating this like a smorgasbord too, and bringing influences from across their discography on here as well. Like, Punishment Through Time almost kind of feels like a cross between, like, Icon and Tragic Idol with some really fucking scuzzy riffs. And Victim of the Past feels like something I could have gotten from In Requiem or Faith Divides Us, Death Unites Us. To be honest, I'm feeling a 4.5 out of 5 on this bad boy. I love how, in a lot of ways, it is a true return to form for Paradise Lost, pulling influence from the earliest days of their career. But it's also like, you know, again, it has this smorgasbordian approach, bringing little elements from across their discography and kind of combining it all into something that is quintessentially Paradise Lost. Next up, we have Medusa, released in September 2017 via Nuclear Blast Records. With this album specifically, Greg McIntosh can be quoted as saying that he wanted Medusa to be slower, sludgier, and more doom-filled than ever before. It's definitely our heaviest album, the heaviest we've done. The idea was to keep it simple, but dark and heavy, and I think we've achieved that. And, a part of me agrees. This thing's pretty heavy. This thing's pretty fucking heavy, dude. Greg was not kidding, man. They are just fully embracing being this dark, menacing, like, fucking Death Doom band with almost, again, this kind of, like, sludgy feel. Like, there's a lot of static, a lot of feedback. There's some really creepy organ work. Nick Holmes' guttural vocals are sounding fucking massive on here. And this whole record is just so cold and so bitter and so fucking dark. The bass sound on here especially, holy fucking shit. I can feel that bass in the pit of my fucking gut, man. So fucking earthy and slimy and gnarly. So many great fucking songs on here, like Fearless Sky, The Longest Winter, the title track Medusa. I'm feeling a very strong 4 out of 5, leaning towards a 4.5 out of 5. Once again, holy shit. I mean, I remember not liking this for some reason, like the first time I heard it back in 2017. I don't know what the fuck I was smoking back in the day, but clearly it wasn't really anything that good. Because, yeah, this shit hits. This is gnarly. And finally, this brings us to Obsidian, the band's most recent album of original material, released in May 2020 via Nuclear Blast Records. With this album, we're leaning back into the more somber, melancholic kind of like goth metal that Paradise Lost is like famous for. There's still like those death metal gutturals and that kind of like Death Doom underbelly, but this is a cleaner and more polished record. At times, I would say also a more progressive record. Very well produced, very well arranged and put together. A lot of really good songs on here. Nothing that's really like wowing me or blowing me away, but a lot of really good stuff. Like Darker Thoughts, The Devil Embraced, Forsaken, Ending Days, Ghost. Like, these are all really strong fucking numbers. The production here is honestly kind of beautiful. I'm feeling a solid 3.5 out of 5 on this one. I think we actually did review this on the Metal Meltdown back in 2020. I don't remember what I gave it at the time. I don't really remember what I said or thought of the record at that time. But right now, like in this moment, I'm like, you know what? I like it. It's pretty. It's a more simplistic Paradise Lost record in some aspects, but it's also a little bit more elaborate and a little bit more evocative. It feels like Paradise Lost kind of calming down a bit, getting more comfortable, not really feeling the need to push themselves at this point, and that's fine, because they don't really need to, you know? It's still a good record. I still think it's well made. I would still recommend it, just maybe not over, like, Plague Within or Medusa. And voila! That's 16 albums! Holy shit! I kind of forgot how big their discography was for a second there. God damn. Now it's your turn to tell me, what's your favorite Paradise Lost album? What's your least favorite Paradise Lost album? How would you rank everything in their discography? Did I get some stuff right? Did I get some stuff wrong? Let me know. Please and thank you. Press this button to subscribe right here so you can get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately in case you somehow aren't already. Look, there's even more videos here. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.